Welcome back, everybody. My name's Emma Scott. I'm chairing this next session. Hopefully you've had a chance to look at the piece of paper that was handed out at the end of the morning session and had a chance to discuss some of the topics that we went over and heard about the crisis of childhood from some pretty amazing speakers this morning, including the analysis. We've seen data showing how the children's audience has moved from traditional media platforms and that public service media content isn't available on different platforms now. They've moved to streaming services and also largely unregulated platforms where they can access age and appropriate content that may not enhance their lives or support them in the development as UK citizens. At the same time, we've heard how these other platforms also offer fantastic opportunities for the audience and how they could become a vital part of a new and better media ecosystem in the UK. The challenge we face is working out how we get everyone, media producers, broadcasters, streamers, VSPs, social media and government, all engaged in that change. The first step is to agree how we describe the problem. Before lunch, we asked you to have a look at the piece of paper we handed out. It highlights how children are navigating content which is not tailored to their needs and how they're not getting sufficient support from what they would refer to as public service media content, media that is age appropriate and culturally relevant. The analysis from CMF argues that this impacts on a child's individual and shared UK identity and contributes to a sense of isolation with increasing levels of anxiety and mental health challenges. And finally, the CMF calls for today's children's audiences to be given access to the same range of culturally relevant, trusted and life-affirming content that was made available to previous generations, but in a form and on platforms that reflect the way children and young people live today. That document will form a key part of the CMF's submission to government, and they're asking for your support for that campaign. You can find out more details on their website, where you can sign up in support of the statement. Coming up this afternoon, we have two sessions that will be exploring a range of options for dealing with issues raised by that analysis, and the results of those discussions will also be shared on the CMF's website. But first, in this session, we want to give you the background to how that analysis came about. The CMF statement was informed by discussions in a series of meetings with key members of the UK's production and broadcast community, which took place between September and November last year. And some of the participants in those discussions have joined us today. I had the pleasure of chairing the 9 hours of meetings we had, described by one afterwards as feeling like family therapy at times. We had some interesting moments. The discussions were certainly lively, and what became clear to me is that once we levelled the playing field and understood everyone's motivation, there was a very clear shared purpose, that public service media for children and young people matters, but that we can no longer rely on traditional media platforms to reach them. So I'd like to introduce the following speakers. We have Patricia Hidalgo from the BBC, Magnus, Brooke from ITV, John McVay from Pact, Kate O'Connor from Animation UK, and Lucy Murphy from Sky. So I'm not going to ask them about the family therapy element, but I will say Patricia, who could be in Buckingham Palace right now with the Queen, but has very importantly chosen to be here instead. What was your main reason for taking part in the meetings, and what did you hope to achieve?
Well, I'm a huge believer, like I imagine everybody in this room is, that what children experience, what they see, what they watch on media really makes them grow up and has an influence in their lives and in the way that they see the world around them. And when I was 13, I came to this country. I'm Spanish, if anybody hasn't realized yet. And I was really quite amazed at the incredible content for children that was available here. I didn't have that in my country. We had a little bit of children's content on the afternoons. Mostly was Tom hitting Jerry or Jerry hitting Tom. There was, maybe one or two shows that were culturally relevant, but that was the minority. And what really struck me, coming here and over the years as I was here, is how varied and how diverse the offer of children's content was in this country, and I really admired it. And when I took office at the BBC, that was one of the main reasons I did that, is because I really believed in this. I believed that the importance of continuing delivering that content in a way that is really meaningful and it can't go away. So for me, this was part of my purpose. This is why I'm here today and not saying hello to the Queen, because it is something that I feel very strongly we have to make happen and really, sort out.
Magnus, for you?
So look, I mean, from an ITV point of view, we've got a proud history of kids TV, and we think it matters, and I think it matters personally. So that was the reason that I think primary reason I went along. I think the second reason was that we've been seriously disrupted as ITV and kids, and particularly given that we're both free to air, so we're a free to air kids provider, universally available, and we're advertising funded, and we're targeting kids in probably the most difficult age group. So effectively school kids, so not preschool, we're not pay, we're free to air, we're ad financed, and that's been a really, really difficult space to fund original kids television. And we've experienced very dramatically falling audiences. We've experienced a very significant fall off in revenue, and some of it the result of government restrictions around HFSS, but actually equally around viewing as well. So it's been a really difficult space for us, and I think I wanted some of that to come over, I think, in some of the deliberations of the overall industry, so that you understood it wasn't because we're bad people or because we don't want to do kids content. It's actually we face the most extraordinary financial constraints in investing in original kids content, particularly live action. And actually, the other bit of it, I think, was to some of the things we've learned as a result of the YACF fund. We threw ourselves in to the YACF fund. We match funded an awful lot of money. We spent many millions of pounds on match funding a lot of the terrific content that many people in this room, I suspect, made for ITV as a result of the YAC fund. And we learned a load of stuff from it. We commissioned and made a load of really great content. We put it out on lots of platforms, and the really, really hard truth is that not that many children watched it. I'm sorry to say, not enough, I think, to justify the investment, which caused us to say we're doing something wrong here. There's something not working in this. If we're producing the most terrific content and actually we're not necessarily reaching the audience in the way that we'd ideally want to do. And part of that is that we needed to turbocharge our own service, ITVX, which we've done. And part of it was also looking around both to other platforms, but potentially to other sources of funding. So one of the reasons we wanted to be around the table was to give some of that experience that we've had firsthand into this bigger industry conversation.
And what did you hope we would achieve as a group?
Well, two things, I think. Firstly, I hope a better understanding of what's happening out there, so that what we didn't do was repeat what we've just done, because the danger is everybody says, oh yes, let's have another fund, and let's make sure that the traditional public service broadcasters have to just invest more money, regardless of the economics, regardless of where children are. that would be a really bad outcome. It would be a bad outcome primarily for children, because they wouldn't actually see a lot of this content. So I did want to try and avoid that outcome, I think. And look, I mean, what's been terrific about today, I think, is the broader context in which these conversations have happened. It feels like a real step forward, that it's been positioned in a broader experience of childhood, and a broader context of what children are actually doing. And I think that the data that we've seen today has been really, really compelling.
Yeah. Thank you. John? What for you?
Well, just thinking about why am I here. It's been a long journey. On the supply side, the producer side, clearly getting the money to make things for the market, but the market has declined for original commissioning for the reasons that Magnus has outlined. So you can keep pouring, making money available, but if there's not buyers or route to market, it doesn't really matter. You need to find a route to market, and I think that's sort of what brings me here today, is the wider context, and with the 9 hours of conversation, thank you, that we had. I think we're getting to a point in the community where there's an appreciation of that, rather than just being ITV must do something or Channel 4 must do something. You've got to understand why they can't, or why it's very difficult for them to do it. The BBC's in a different position, but right now, in any genre, none of my members are working, or very few of them right now. Since last year and this year, there's not a lot of commissioning in any genre because we're going through a very tough advertising recession. And that's impacting on the commissioning budgets. A lot of money was spent in 22, that has put stock on the shelves. So for all producers, it's a really, really tough time. So the economics of our industry, the changes in our industry are profound. We are going through disruption. And I think trying to get to a place where there's some idea of what does good look like, because I don't think we all agree on that, and I think everyone in this room will have a different idea on that. But I think as a community, if we can get to some idea what does good look like, how do you get there? You then maybe come up with ways of making that work, and that might be. I'm not saying this is a proposal, but maybe future funding might be more widely available to more platforms where children are going. Those are things that might be. If it's about we want kids to get the stuff, then you maybe have to have that conversation, and that might be a very difficult one, and it might be a very difficult one for politicians, given their concerns about online harms and safety. So.
And so, you want to be the voice of the producers in the room. And
that's what they pay me for, yeah.
Yeah, that's handy. And we'll come on to it with the next questions about what we all think might be solutions, but what do you think we managed to achieve in that room?
Well, other people can reflect on that, but what I thought it was a good opportunity to be frank, open, challenged.
All that.
And, it's a very, out of all the genres I work in, right, with all my members, children's is probably the most dynamic in terms of what people think good is, or what it's for, or what it should be, or what it could be. It's probably got more opinions about that than any other genre. And that's good, that's healthy, that's brilliant, because it shows there's lots of creativity and thought, but it's quite hard to corral that into that's what we need to do. That's a way of making things better. So.
Yeah. And for you, Kate, what brought you to the meetings, and what were you hoping to achieve?
Well, like John, we're clearly an industry body, clearly representing the creators, clearly a trade body, unapologetically so. But actually, if I could just really, really quickly say three things in answer to that, because I had so much hope for those 9 hours. Animation UK was set up 5 or 6 years ago as a formal body, and during that time there's been at least 2 major reviews of children's content, Ofcom generated, instigated, huge amount of panels, huge amount of talking, huge amount of angsting, huge amount of data gathering and analysis, and we all agreed prior to coming into those rooms for the 9 hours, Emma, that there was a market failure, however we define that now. I thought we'd all kind of got to that point when we moved in. So it was about how do we then move it forward? How do we remove the red lines, the positions, and work together to solve it? Primarily, and I say this on behalf of Animation UK and all the members I represent, because we do care about the audience. The audience isn't a minority audience. It's 20% of the population. I know this sounds glib, it's 100% of the future. We know it's difficult. We know there's been changing viewing habits. We know that there's lower advertising revenue. We know all the issues and the challenges, but isn't it supremely and unarguably important that we put the audience first in this case? Because we also know that the high quality or culturally relevant, or whatever definition you want to use, content that kids see does have a profound impact, not just on their cognitive development, but also on their sense of belonging, on their mental health, and all the other research that's been presented to us over the years to confirm that. And children are spending more and more time in front of screens. Whatever they're watching, we want that quality to be impactful, to be important. It's vital that we crack this. It isn't just an academic debate. It's essential that we get this right. We needed to be in the room to make that happen. But it's not just about that, and it's also, I want to pick up on something Ollie said from the last session. We can't just ignore the elephant in the room. There has been, over the last 20 years, a 60% decline in investment in UK-originated kids' content, which we all come to the table agreeing is valuable, will pay dividends for our society, for our kids, for our future. 60% decline, 80% decline in UK-originated viewing hours against stability for other genres, John, against increase in budgets. I mean, there's recent difficulties, but if you look at the Ofcom figures, you will see that most other genres, most other demographics have had increases over that time, but not our children, not our kids. So whatever we think about the changing viewing habits and how we solve that problem and how ITV gets to grips with its responsibility as a PSB for kids, that's what we have to concentrate on, I think. And of course I care about the creators, because the creators who make this fabulous content, by the way, which is fabulous, thanks to the BBC, Channel 5, Sky, fantastic content, all the alpha blocks, number blocks, Odo, I can name so many titles, 1, 2, 3, Numbers, Squads. I mean, they are changing the way our kids learn, literally. But there's not enough of it. And so if there's not enough of it, we need to do more of it, and we need to get that content to where kids are watching. That's the solution we have to find. And I was really, really keen to do that on behalf of members who make that content and who also can create jobs and growth and export our fabulous kids content that we've got world-renowned reputation for. So, look, I'm passionate about it, we all are, but for me there were the audience and the industry arguments.
Thank you. And before we get on to next steps, Lucy, what brought you in? Your Sky isn't officially a PSB.
We're not, and actually that was one of the reasons I wanted to be part of the group, because I wanted to change the debate between public service broadcasters and public service content. And I think, I won't talk about why it matters. Nobody in this room would be here if it didn't matter. We're all heavily invested in this industry and in the audience that we serve. Sky have been very committed over the last years to investing heavily into children's content. In news, in natural history, in current affairs, in drama, in animation. But we're not a public service broadcaster. Nobody compels us to do this. We're not, beholden to do it. We do it because it matters and because it's the right thing to do. And I did want to enter that debate as a non-PSB to advocate for PSC being counted, and also to really think about in a very productive way, the changing nature of how children and families, let's not forget families are part of this, the way that they consume media content has changed, and yet we still view success through a very narrow prism of Barb measurement. Now, we've talked this morning about Barb, why it's broken. Don't even get me started on the fact that Barb still has a category called Housewives with Children in 2024. But we've been really clear, if we're going to invest in that content, we need to make sure it has impact, it reaches children where they are. And that isn't on a screen always. Sometimes it's in a workshop that we'll do through Sky VIP where they can learn to make models. Sometimes it's going to be in school where we send our news provision. 2 million children a month watch our news content. It's not all on a linear channel and it's not all on demand. They're watching it in schools, in news clubs. They're reading, millions more reading every week. It's incredibly important that we can change the debate so we're measuring success on where children are and not just through that, are they watching linear TV? They are, but they're doing other things too.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the stats this morning backed that up, didn't they? Of sort of the very broad nature of where consumption's happening, but
yes.
the lens for television is very much on a kind of counting it by Barb numbers
yes.
approach. Yeah.
Yeah, and just one other point is, I totally understand, you guys, we're looking at the creation of new content every year, we can't ignore another elephant in the room. There is already a lot of kids' content. All of those hours, every year the new stuff's joining what's being created over, the UK is world renowned for creating brilliant kids' content. A 10-year-old programme can have the same value as a brand new content. And actually, on-demand viewing and sort of new ways of viewing are allowing today's audiences to access brilliant shows from the past. So yes, it's important, and we are actively investing, along with Channel 5, along with BBC. We invest a lot every year, but we want to value older kids' shows too, because they still have a value.
Thank you. When we took part in the meetings, we did a lot on the market context and a lot on what you're hearing now is the shared consensus around the nature of the problem, and then we've seen that in the research this morning. We then did spend quite a lot of time trying to find solutions. And the CMF announcement today is talking about the analysis that went underway. So we didn't sign up to a list of agreed next steps. And so what you're going to see later on in CMF will be talking about what they think the next steps are going to be. But I am going to ask the panellists now, because there was some very open discussion, you might not all hear it all here, about what you would like to happen next for the audience. How can the proven talent we have in the creative sector be harnessed for UK society? What more would you be doing in order to sort of solve some of the problems that we're seeing? So Patricia, back to you.
Yeah, I think that one of the things I wanted to say, and this is not what we discussed in those 9 hours, but I was at Kids Screen recently, and I was part of a group of executives, children's media leaders, that got together to discuss the problem. The problem that we're talking about here is a global problem. It's not just for us. And I think that it's really important that we put that into context with whatever we're talking about. Because not only are, global and, international players getting together and talking, and doing exactly the same things we're doing in their own countries, but we have to be mindful that, if we really want to be able to win in this space, we have to be knowledgeable of what the others are talking about, and how do we become a community of producers and broadcasters of children's media, because it is global right now. And I think that is very important. But going back to the culture relevant content, which I think is something that is very important. And yes, we have, loads of content, more content every year. But, we need to continue to discover new ideas, new ways of telling the stories. We need to adapt what we're doing. And it's important that we have that funding as well as the finding. And the funding is not going to come from just in here. The funding is going to come also from international players. And that's, I think, we need to understand. How do we attract, how do we incentivize those international broadcasters and streamers to invest in this country and to invest with us to make sure that we can create that culture relevant content for our audiences, but also, be able to be a global force that, the BBC has always been a global force. The UK has always been a global force for democracy in the world. The type of content that we create here travels around the world, and it really is a force for good. And I do know, because I have been in the American big broadcasters, that unless we incentivize the rest of the world to work with us, it's just not going to happen. So I don't have the solutions, but I know that we need to think very clearly about that. It's not just the UK, it's how do we place ourselves in an international global environment, and that's a very important thing to think about.
Are there any particular measures that you would advocate for?
I'm not going to advocate for any measures. No, I have to say, there's one thing that I've said plenty of times, and this, I love what you have done, John, to get us where we are with the tax credits. The amount of work that went in that, to try and illustrate the problem And I was surprised we got so little in terms of, it is a lot more, but if you compare it to the rest of the international, tax incentives are out there, we didn't get anywhere near that 30% that others have. So, okay, it's good, and I really appreciate that. But I do think that we could, think about this culture relevant top up to the current quotas. It doesn't take away the current quotas. You can still come to this country, create a show that is not British at all, but because you created it here, brought the money and brought the jobs, you get that rebate. But is there something else we can put the cherry on the top that will actually help our argument to invite and incentivize other international players to come and make content that is culturally relevant to us, and actually, have their cake and eat it, because they get more tax incentives, as tax rebates? That's one idea. I've been talking about this for a long time. And it's not my idea. I mean, if you think about what the French do, that's what they do. Exactly, that's what they do. If you make it French, if they have a French broadcaster on board, they get much more money than if they just make it in France. And that's one of many.
So we did get an idea. Magnus, what would you like to see happen next?
So, well, look, the first thing I think is, as ITV, we have to do everything we can. So we're trying to be as innovative as we can, particularly with partnerships, as you mentioned, Patricia. So particularly looking for international partnerships. So we've developed something called the Sound Collector with RAI in Italy, which is a fantastic series, voiced by Keira Knightley. It's a good example of, we've got other partnerships. We've got another one with RTE. And also with pay players. And we've also done some really, I think, quite exciting things with Cartoon Network, and we've become a kind of free-to-air premiere space for some of the content that they've been investing in the original content. So that's the first thing. I think we need to do what we can to make the money we have got go as far as it possibly can by leveraging all sorts of things. At the same time, we're developing, we're continuing to invest in Dave Spud, which is a very, very culturally specific piece of it. So culturally specific, with references to chip butties, deep fried Mars bars, and various other things. But actually, it's not the easiest sell around the world. It's a terrific piece. Illuminate films are really, really good. But that's where I think the pressure point comes, in a way. I mean, the great thing about Mr. Bean is it does sell brilliantly around the world. It's slapstick. It's a fantastic bit of animation, but it's not terribly culturally specific, I would say. But when you get down into these very culturally specific things, you really start to have some questions. And to be honest, I can't do any better than Greg, I think, who's come up with this formula, very simple formula of finding and funding. It's really as simple as that. How are children going to find it? Where are children consuming content? How do they want to consume it? We've seen a wealth of data on that this morning. And the second thing, how are you going to fund it? Is it a commercial model? Is it a publicly funded model? And you need to figure that out. And tax credits are probably part of that. Dare I say it, public funding the BBC is probably part of that. Whether that's licence fee or something else is probably quite an important part of that overall ecology. It maybe you need to look at the platforms potentially to step up and fund some of this content. Potentially there's algorithmic prominence on some of these platforms potentially for culturally specific UK content. Potentially we wouldn't have to give away 40%, 45% of our revenue when we go onto YouTube. I mean there are lots of things in the mix here that you could add together into an overall package that could help to revive it.
Thank you. And a number of these we'll be talking about in the session after next. Thank you. John, what about you? There must be things that you... A shopping list.
Always things.
Yeah.
Well, look, I think, the UK independent sector, to Patricia's point, we are already international because my guys go and shake every tree they can find, wherever that is, at Kid Screen, Real Screen, MIP TV, MIPCOM, London Screenings, right, wherever. I mean, the UK indie sector is one of the most internationally entrepreneurial sectors of any production community in the world. So, but, all of that money comes with a price. All of that comes with a price in terms of rights, cultural relevance. French, they can make it in French. It's culturally relevant. We have English language. So to Magnus's point, I was thinking about comedy. We make some brilliant comedy. It doesn't sell. It's very hard to raise money for comedy for, the stuff we love, because it just doesn't sell. Some does, but it's really hard to raise money for comedy. So as you become more culturally relevant, you're less attractive to other funding. There's always a price to pay, and sometimes that works, and many of you in the room have pulled it off and done some amazing stuff which satisfied your investors and was also culturally relevant. So I'm always a bit cautious about going into that space. I think I sort of agree more with Magnus that I think it will be tax credits. It's a holistic approach. I think we're at the point where market failure was, well, actually, there's not enough there on the mainstream channels, so kids can't see it. So we need to try and supplement the investment to make sure we can do that. But as the market's exploded and kids have diversified in their viewing, I think that changes. It'll be lots of different things to try and get to a point, rather than it's one magic bullet.
Kate?
Yeah, well, this is boring, isn't it? Because we're all going to say the same thing, especially when you get to number 4.
Well, actually, that's quite good.
To be honest, this level of consensus wasn't quite as evident in the 9 sessions. I'm going to say this is really helpful having an audience, because I think we're agreeing far more in public than we did in private. I don't know how you guys feel about that, but the no magic bullet point is the point I was going to make, using exactly those words. Of course, our animation creators and production companies have always had to be international. They can't make anything without that kind of co-production or international influx of funding. But we have to be able to hang on to the rights. We have to be able to create great content, but also great businesses, sustainable businesses, businesses that the UK owns and can export. And I think that, it's sometimes not fashionable to talk about the needs of the industry, but it's right up there. It has to be, because the two things are so linked. Of course we have to do partnerships. And of course I think we have to think about things like quotas and levies and funds. I'm going to say it. We said the finding and funding, but let's talk about how we get those funds then. Let's get right down and talk about that, I hope, in the next session and beyond. And when talking about quotas and levies, let's look at where they're successfully applied internationally, because they are, and they have been, whether you look at Canada or France or Ireland. And tax relief, of course, is in the mix. And sorry, it wasn't just Pact, Patricia. Sorry, I have to say, spent a year of my life on that. So we're claiming it as well, jointly. John, I'm sure you'd agree. And does he agree? So I think the holistic, the 360, the number of issues that we have. I think Ollie put it in one of the meetings. It's everything, everywhere, all at once. We have to find the solution to this, and I think we've got the right people starting to think about that now. If they can push aside some of their red lines, we can move forward.
What about you, Lucy?
I think there is probably a build on the tax incentives, and thank you to everybody, there were other people in the room too, who helped get us to a much more globally competitive situation. But I think the build on that is, let's keep it benchmarked. Let's keep making sure we are globally competitive. So I think that's something that we'd be very keen to do. And then, sort of, again, picking up on Magnus's point about collaboration, I think we've got to collaborate as an industry. We've already successfully collaborated with Milkshake and Channel 5 on a very big co-production, Pip and Posy, which we are continuing. There are ways in which we can work together where we all have, an enormous amount back. I think we're often seen as competitive, and yes, we had robust conversations in that room. But we are all very much joined together in terms of the end result. And we need to find ways that we can collaborate, that break apart traditional models of working, and we find new ways of doing so.
Yeah. Thank you. I think it's fair to say you've probably heard most of the measures that were discussed in the room, but no one's going to put their hand to which ones were sort of voted in or out. I think where I got to in chairing it was it very obviously reached a point where there was just too much vested interest in the room, or kind of movement where you're not going to ask people who are currently competitors in the market to kind of come up with solutions, or that we were going in sort of certain directions. So that's why we called a line at it, and that's why we're here today to sort of move it on in a more public debate. What I would like to say is I found the level of willingness to engage in what are very difficult discussions very high, taking part in the sessions that we held. And as I said at the beginning, the common consensus was incredibly strong. None of these people needed to be here today, but they all have very, very proactively and willingly taken part. And really, I think it's now looking to government, to the regulator, to where these solutions are now going to come from, because I don't think within the industry we're going to come up with this sort of killer list ourselves. So I'd like to say a big, big thank you to everybody on the panel for taking part today. And I'm now going to introduce the next session. If you'd like to give a round of applause. Thank you.